Welcome back to this course on copyright and related rights law. In this week, we have been looking at the subject matter of musical works. We started with understanding what are the definitions of musical work in various copyright acts in different countries. What we found is that there was no clear explanation of what is music in these definitions. These definitions provided certain exclusions, such as the exclusion of words, exclusion of actions, but did not tell us what music is. In order to understand what music is, we devoted 2 sessions in which we looked at the distinction between sound as perceived unpleasant and sound perceived as pleasant. We then looked at the distinction between the fact of music and the form of music. In today's discussion, in ending this week, we make a distinction between musical works and sound recordings. This image is an image we have considered in previous sessions in this week. You know what this image now is. This image shows sheet music. It is a musical score, a combination of graphical notations, also a composition containing music. Now, all of you must be able to clearly state that this musical sheet, the graphical notation, in itself is different from the music. But what is sound recording? Isn't music a sound? And doesn't sound recording mean sound recording of musical work or music? When we say sound recording, because this is not musical recording and uses the generic term sound. From our previous sessions, we understand that something like noise is also a sound. Something need not be pleasant or unpleasant in order to be called a sound. Therefore, sound may or may not be music. And the constituents of sound recording may simply be any kind of sound which may be music or not. Consider this image. You can see a person delivering a sermon. The recording of this sermon can be in 2 ways. One, it could be an audiovisual recording. What do we mean by audiovisual recording? Both the visual as well as the sound is recorded onto a medium. Thus, whatever this person is professing in his sermon can be seen by way of a video in which the sound is also captured. Another way is through purely a sound recording. For example, A tape recorder in which only the sound is getting recorded would obviously not capture any visuals. But a common element in both of these is that the sound has gotten recorded. What is the sound here? The sound here comprises of the voice of this individual, which has been used to constitute the words of his sermon. What about this image? If a recording of sounds were made at this location, what kind of sounds will get recorded? The sound of falling water, the sound of insects, such as the chirping of crickets. Several sounds that we associate with nature will get recorded in this sound recording. None of this needs to be a musical work. The mere fact that sound of any nature is getting recorded, that's a sound recording. Let us take one more example. What you can see here is a kind of construction activity. As it is, this activity and the sound that it produces is not a very pleasant sound for many. But its recording is also going to be considered as a sound recording. But what is sound? Sound is vibrations that travel through the air or another medium, and which can be heard when they reach a person's or animal's ear. This is how the Indian Copyright Act defines a sound recording. It states, sound recording means a recording of sounds from which such sounds may be produced regardless of the medium on which such recording is made or the method by which the sounds are produced. You can see from this definition of sound recordings, there is no mention of sound as music. This is very important for us to understand because in creating a distinction between sound by itself and music separately, in itself that creates a kind of a distinction between the type of work. There are several other factors that distinguish a musical work from a sound recording. But because we are looking to understand musical works in its entirety, one part of that which we must distinguish is how, despite being called a sound recording, a musical work is different from it. In this image, you can see a cassette. Now, cassettes are not being used as much as they were being used in the decades past. But a cassette, as you can see in this particular definition, is a medium on which such recording is made. If you play the cassette, you would require a cassette player such as this, in which a certain method is used to produce music from the cassette. Neither the cassette nor the method of producing the sound is a sound recording. Therefore, what constitutes sound recording are two considerations. One, the presence of sound, any sound, pleasant, unpleasant, or not unpleasant or pleasant, and recording. If these two aspects are present, then that recording is called as a sound recording. But the sound recordings that we usually listen to, are these sound recordings recordings of construction? Recordings of nature? They are not. The sound recordings that we listen to are sung by famous singers. Such as the recording of Arijit Singh singing. Arijit Singh's performance covers musical works as well as literary works. Therefore, a sound recording that we generally encounter in our daily lives are not recordings in which there is no clear work embedded. Sound recordings that we usually hear incorporate some or the other work which is being presented by a performer. Consider this image. You can see a studio setting. In a studio setting, the performer is presenting the lyrics which are being accompanied by a musical work. Now the recording is being done simultaneously. Studio recordings such as this find their way into CDs, on OTT platforms, when they're released by publishers. But at their very basic, sound recordings cannot be done unless and until there is a performance in such a setting. What we have understood from our previous session is that a performance such as humming or singing, even spontaneous, can create musical work. There is no requirement for a graphical notation to precede such a performance. Thus, when a recording is made at the studio, if there is no prior existing composition, in theory, the performer can create musical work as he sings. And if any fixation requirement is mandatory for copyright to subsist, then the sound recording can satisfy that fixation requirement. You would note that in our understanding, therefore, musical works accompany the singing. Singing is a presentation, an acoustic presentation made by the singer, and because of its pleasing nature, we know that this is music. If it's a creative expression, then it is a musical work. Therefore, musical works are only but an element in the sound recording. There are other elements such as the voice of the singer, which is also a sound. The instrumentals, which are either present while the singer is singing or is merged by the technician. They are also sounds. Therefore, a musical work is just one of the elements in such sound recordings. What are the other elements? Think about the other elements that constitute sound. As discussed, the voice of the performer is a specific sound. The instrumentals, they could be many. The guitar, the drum, the piano, any other instrument. They are all sounds getting recorded. But something that connects all of these different elements together is the composition. And therefore, even though musical work is only one element in such sound recordings, it could be the most important element that potentially connects all other elements. Take a look at this image. What do you see? You can see two musicians, two guitarists, who are performing on the street. It's a kind of activity called as busking. This activity, performers perform on the street or such public places for the pleasure of the public and at many times for payment. But something you can see here is that for such a performance to take place, for such performers to perform, there need not be any sound recording. There are some other types of public interaction wherein an individual would play the music in public, say through a cassette player. This will not amount to a performance because there is no performer who is presenting anything live. Rather, this would be communication of the recorded sound to the public. Consider this statement and see whether this is correct. Musical work does not need any sound recording to exist. If you are saying that this is correct, then you are right. Musical works do not require any kind of sound recording. You will recollect that musical works are simply comprised of creative musical expressions which may simply be created by way of performance. There need not be any kind of a sound recording in order for musical work to exist. But why is fixation of musical works important? And those copyright acts which are mandating fixations, or in other words, require recording in some form in order for copyright to subsist in the musical work. Why are they mandating such a requirement? As you can see, they require it for the purpose of evidence. Evidence of what? If any musician is going to claim that he has a copyright in a musical work, then we have understood that a musical work will have copyright in it only if it is originating from the composer. Therefore, the expression will have to be original in nature. There will have to be some distinctiveness to that particular expression as compared to the others. We have also understood that it is theoretically possible for different people to arrive at substantially similar compositions. But practically, this might not happen a lot. But nevertheless, if anybody had to prove that their musical work is comprised of a sequence of notes expressed in a particular way, the best way to do this is by way of fixation. We have noted that under the Indian Copyright Act, which has moved away from the requirement of fixation, the specific exclusion that has been made in the interpretation of composer is that a composer is a person who composes music regardless of whether he notes it in any form of graphical notation. While graphical notation is not something that is followed in the Indian tradition of music, if recording is done of the musical work, then such recording can serve as a very good piece of evidence. And as a practice, this must be something which musicians could use to their benefit. And therefore, fixation is something which is a beneficial consideration, and fixation in the form of sound recording can act as a way in which musical works can get recorded. The only element that must be considered here is that a performance of this music will be needed in order for the generation of sound and a sound recording to take place. Now that we have a sound recording which is different from the musical work, and that a sound recording can only result once there is performance of the music. Is the making of the sound recording a copyright of the musical work's author's copyright? Is the making of the sound recording the composer's copyright? It is. We see in section 14 of the Indian Copyright Act, it states copyright means the exclusive right to do or authorize the doing of the following acts in respect of a work or any substantial part thereof, namely, to make any sound recording in respect of that work. Therefore, we understand that the composer's copyright doesn't only include the right to authorize performance of that composition, but also authorization of making of the sound recording. Lastly, let us consider this issue in the context of films. A film is at its basic an audiovisual recording, which means that there is a visual recording or a visual perception to which a sound is accompanying. Since this is the consideration, the sound recording, if it comprises of music, will be accompanying the visuals in such audiovisual recording. Thus, just like how in a sound recording a musical work could be just one element, similarly in an audiovisual recording such as a cinematograph film, musical work could be one of the elements. With this, I hope we have understood musical works in detail. We are now clearly able to make a distinction between literary works, artistic works, and musical works. Literary works provide an informative value or an instructional value or the pleasure of literary enjoyment. Artistic works provide visual appeal, and musical works provide hearing pleasure. With this, we end this week of our understanding of copyright and specifically the subject matter of musical works. In the next week, we will look at the fourth subject matter, which is dramatic works. Thank you for joining me. See you next week. Thank you.